if we do not win this war, as it were, against federal overreach, then our area of liberty is going to continue to contract. And if we do not hold firm for fiscal responsibility, then essentially we'll lose our wherewithal for freedom, our resources, our income, our wealth. And we'll find that we're not only limited in terms of our freedom by regulation, but what we can do with that freedom by virtue of how many resources we have left. So there's a lot at stake. The people need to stand firm for their conservative representatives and elected officials and give them the backing they deserve to stand down this federal government.
What's the plan? How do you take on someone who's been so established in the local politics there?
Well, there is hope, I should say, to dislodging even someone as ensconced as Lloyd Doggett. And we need to just turn back to 2010, because we were able to dislodge a long-time Democratic congressman named Chet Edwards. And this was a situation where he had millions of dollars, and he had support, obviously, from the Democrat Party, as well as, I hate to say, a number of moderate Republicans who, for whatever reason, believed that he was a good representative for their parochial interest, be it military or business. And certainly there was a wave election involved in a backlash kind of situation where enough people realized that part of our problem is the incumbent political class. And so in 2010, Bill Flores was able to unseat Chet Edwards, and he had a lot of help, not only from the Republican Party per se, but from conservative groups and Tea Party coalitions and others who essentially rode to the sound of the guns. Now, I hope that in this case, in 2012, we have another wave election to match 2010, and I do fully expect that not only will Republicans help in unseating Lloyd Doggett, but that a number of conservative groups and Tea Party coalitions and others will continue to be active in the political process until we can essentially take back our government from a political class that is no longer amenable to the people's interests or concerns and not willing to give them effective redress. And clearly, with President Obama being so very unpopular in the state of Texas, all we have to do is point out that there is no one closer and more closely affiliated to the political and philosophical positions of the Obama administration than Lloyd Doggett. He is their representative in Texas. And in fact, he's been the Lone Ranger on a number of issues, essentially taking the federal position over the position in the interest of the state of Texas on education and on Obamacare, on social issues as well.
Well, and I know with the Chet Edwards race, it was all about the money, and people were, even Republicans, they liked the money that Chet Edwards brought to the district in some fashion or another, and I'm sure Lloyd Doggett does the same for his district. Those same people, they want to continue getting the money. So how do you tell them that it's over? You're not.
Actually, I think that the bigger problem these days is an acknowledgement that our debt is too great and that spending is too high. And I do believe that given the emergency financial situation that the United States is in, this has begun to trump a lot of very parochial and sometimes just selfish interests. We have a situation where our budget process is unsustainable, our spending is out of control, and we have essentially approached a crisis point at which if we don't pull back the rate of spending increase of the federal government, we're going to be at a point where Greece and Italy and Spain are. And I'm seriously, I say this very seriously, we are at a point now where the national debt equals our GDP. So we have a 1-to-1 ratio between our national debt and our gross domestic product. Well, once we exceed that to a point where our debt is 115% of our GDP, we essentially reach the point at which countries collapse. And we're very, very close to that. And in fact, if we have 4 more years of President Obama, we will be over that threshold. It is now at a point at which I think most informed and observing people will conclude that we've got to rein things back. And they're willing to do it too.
I want to get into a discussion on immigration real quick.
Okay.
Because obviously with Newt Gingrich's statement a few nights ago, first, what were your thoughts on his statement?
Well, a few thoughts about immigration in general and about Newt Gingrich specifically. First of all, I want to start by saying that I am not an advocate of a white man's republic. Okay? On the other hand, I take a very conservative view on immigration issues. And I'm also someone who is personally aware and affected by immigration to this extent. I was in the Army, met my wife in the Philippines, and we fell in love and were married, and we're going on 26 years, and she was naturalized as a citizen of the United States, and I like to say naturalized Texan as well, in about 1987. And then subsequently, we also sponsored her biological nephew to immigrate to this country from another country. So to the extent that there's a Browning effect of America, I guess I've contributed to it. On the other hand, we scrupulously followed a legal process, and it took 17 years for us to legally bring this young man to this country. And so I have a very different perspective on the idea of enabling or facilitating or providing amnesty for those who simply walk across a line in the sand or wade across the water. So I'm very opposed to anything that would displace those who are standing in a line and who are going to be there for years. Displace them in favor of others who have essentially broken the law to get here in the first place. I am not for amnesty. On the other hand, I was encouraged by Newt Gingrich's comment, which essentially recognized the impracticality of wholesale deportation of 12 to 20 million people to somewhere else, but recognized that neither do you have to make them citizens. You don't have to put them on a fast track to citizenship. You can essentially identify the individuals, change some of the incentives, and not allow them to be citizens unless or until they've returned to their point of origin and done so legally.
And some people say, well, that in itself is the pathway to citizenship.
Well, it could potentially be a pathway to a working visa. It might be a pathway to permanent residence, but I'm one to say that there is no necessity to make residents into citizens, particularly if it's known that their status is essentially illegal. Well, I believe that our financial crisis is created by a constitutional crisis. And by that I mean we have a failure to adhere to constitutional government, which is costly and essentially driving us into the drink. If we eliminated federal agencies that did not pursue constitutional ends, then we'd eliminate 5 if you're Ron Paul, 3 if you're Rick Perry. But essentially, we could eliminate entire agencies, and we should be about that. Certainly, there is no federal role in education whatsoever, according to the United States Constitution. And the same could be said for energy. And this really brings it home because what we have now is a set of agencies, regulatory agencies, that control things within Texas and do things to us that reduce our standard of living and encourage unemployment. And I believe artificially prevent all of America from emerging from this great recession of ours. Case in point, you've got the EPA essentially telling the state of Texas that you can't drill or produce oil, and eliminating our ability to do so in all of West Texas in order to protect a lizard. You've got a kind of administration-based, self-imposed moratorium on offshore drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. From a national standpoint, we've got a pipeline coming down from Canada that stopped at the border of Montana that our own State Department, EPA, precludes us from completing. And so, in case after case, both federal and national scope and also within the state of Texas, federal restrictions preclude us from doing the things that would produce energy and create high-paying jobs. Now, this is not a minor thing. We have over 100 years of energy in the state of Texas, another 100 years throughout the country. We could essentially not only end energy dependence on foreign sources in 10 years, we could become a net energy exporter inside of 10 years. And this is all because we are no longer constitutional in our viewpoint. We have a situation where you have an agency like the EPA or like the Energy Department saying that because I'm a regulatory administrative agency, I claim the supremacy clause of the Constitution, and I can tell you, the sovereign state of Texas, what to do. Well, if I'm a U.S. congressman, let me tell you what I'll do. And this is something that any enlightened federal congressman in office could initiate, but I will do it, and that is we can amend the Administrative Procedures Act to state categorically that no administrative or regulatory agency can trump state law if the two come into conflict. I mean, you can have the Congress essentially modify the construction and the rules of decision for federal courts, essentially directing them to give precedence to the 10th Amendment in any case of statutory ambiguity, for instance, on redistricting or in matters of energy. Now, this is the kind of constitutional thinking that we need to put front and center and make stick. And if we would do that, we would find that we would produce oil and natural gas in abundance, and we would produce high-paying jobs in abundance, and voila, we would be out of this recession, which is largely a creation of the federal government and this administration's policies.
How do they do that and smile while they're doing it?
I believe that if one is an ideological socialist, one can do that. And I think that we essentially need to face up to the fact that we have a president and his administrative czars that he's appointed who are truly committed to a model for America that is not traditional, is not constitutional, is not what the founders would have in mind, is not even what Franklin Roosevelt would have in mind. I mean, we have left discussions of social safety net responsibility to a discussion that involves cradle-to-grave national consolidated socialist solutions for everyone. We are no longer talking safety net, we're talking about nanny state. And we're no longer talking about kind of this dialectical discussion within the bounds of the Constitution. We're talking about constitutional government versus unconstitutional or extra-constitutional government. Things that have no basis in law, which they are implementing simply because they perceive they have the power or the political wherewithal to do it. And so we have really crossed, recently under President Obama, a Rubicon of sorts, where we are leaving our constitutional heritage. And we've got to snap back in the election of 2012 if we are going to regain our republic.
I want to talk about the future. You kind of mentioned it earlier, the high-tech jobs. You know, how do we develop and grow these high-tech jobs that everyone's talking about?
Let me say this. obviously, I would like to see the United States of America remain at the cutting edge of technology and high-tech opportunities. However, we have made a mistake in this country of believing that America would be entirely made up of just a certain kind of job or category of job, and we've forgotten that every country has a full spectrum of people and job opportunities. And in fact, in a country like ours of 307 million, it would be somewhat unrealistic to believe that all of our workers or laborers would be employed, say, in high tech. And not only that, it wouldn't even serve our needs well, because we have the full panoply of needs for a complex economy. What we've done is, unfortunately, ship our manufacturing jobs abroad. To some extent, we've done that while keeping some high technology and computer-related jobs. It doesn't make sense. We ought to be looking at having a full spectrum economy to essentially not only serve the needs of our people, but to provide employment opportunities for everyone. It is not true that everyone will become a 4-year college graduate, nor would we want that, I shouldn't think. We always need vocational opportunities. Certainly, I need a plumber at home, an electrician at home, and I need all the services attendant to just being an individual and having small businesses. And there are so many opportunities related to that. But why should we structure our economy in a way that incentivizes businesses to send these needs overseas to be addressed? And also, I think, why should we structure our educational system in such a way that it doesn't enable people to make their own decisions and follow their own comparative advantages and pathways to success, which may not meet this ideal of, kind of a high-tech, high-tech place in the global economy. It doesn't really pan out that way.
I think if we start opening up a dialogue on why this large Hispanic community that's growing and is not assimilating as quickly, what needs to happen to do that?
Okay. There are two types of immigration, obviously, that take place. There's legal and illegal. And both represent millions entering the country and forming communities and essentially assimilating to a host or majority culture, but also affecting the host or majority culture. And there is a limit to a rate of assimilation. There are natural processes that take place. Typically, your second generation will speak English, and your third generation will enter middle class economically, and by the fourth, you've got professionals. And this is a kind of process that takes place, and it may happen quicker than that in the case of some ethnic groups and slower in the case of others. And it has to do with the culture that is introduced, as well as the reaction and the integration of the host culture. In the case of facilitating assimilation, one would hope that American culture were stronger so that there would be something to assimilate to. And this is a problem, because traditional American values and traditional American institutions, to some extent, have declined. And so there's not this kind of very strong Americanism to which anyone would assimilate to. And so they're finding, any immigrant group will find, that there's not this kind of monolithic thing called America that they can actually model or become more like, even if they wanted to. And so, to some extent, we can improve that situation, again, by following the Constitution, by allowing societies, states, and local communities to model their own moral environments and create a strong culture so that when people move there, they tend to assimilate to it or get with it in some respect. The other thing is we absolutely must control our border, because by limiting an intentional introduction or free flow of additional sources of immigration, you'll essentially slow that flow down and allow a natural assimilation to occur. In fact, it is untrue that America has always been this open arms welcome to mass immigration. In fact, our history has been more of a sine wave. As conditions in America changed, as conditions abroad changed, and as laws changed. Because, for instance, after nearly a century of mass immigration, this country deliberately practically shut the door on immigration in 1924. That was one reason why, unfortunately, we were not able to receive sufficient numbers of European Jewry who fled the fascism in Europe. So we've gone through periods of mass immigration and nearly no immigration. And it just so happens that we are in an unprecedented period of mass immigration really since 1965. It is past time, socially and politically, that we ought to begin to taper down the levels of legal immigration, much less securing the border against illegal immigration. We have 1 million people arriving every year legally, immigrants to this country. Now, consider that this situation is even more pressing in periods of economic downturn, because we are sustaining a level of unemployment 9.2% and has been for years. And yet we are creating jobs, but many of those jobs are going to others who are legally arriving as well as those who are illegally arriving. Plus, we have an absurd situation of where hundreds of thousands of people are giving working visas every year, and there are millions in the country already with working visas, but because these people come from a place that qualifies them as a minority, when they arrive, they tend to get employment preference at cities and towns and states and the federal government because they are minority. Not that that makes a whole lot of sense, because since 2005, the state of Texas has been a minority state. And yet, a working visa given to a Nigerian who arrives here, that person will find himself preferenced in a federal contract over a native Anglo-American. Also, the illegal immigration is a situation that affects not only the Anglo plurality in the state of Texas, but also native Tejanos who've been here generations, because they are also being displaced. And this is a terrible thing that the Obama administration, I believe, is deliberately pursuing. And it's not just them. There have been other administrations that have neglected the border. But I believe, certainly, that the Obama administration is purposely pursuing an open border policy to displace not only the indigenous Anglo plurality or majority where it exists, but the Native American culture. In other words, generations of immigrants who have assimilated to a predominant American culture. We are watching the displacement of that political and social culture, I believe, deliberately. And this is nothing less than what amounts to a soft genocide perpetrated by the president and his administration. The first thing we ought to do is grant the governor's request for 30,000 boots on the ground. And then we ought to absolutely secure the border. That is something that every lieutenant and sergeant in the Army knows how to do. Something that we go around the world as defense contractors doing for other countries. A combination of fence line, of technical monitoring, of eyes in the air, boots on the ground, of force when it's necessary, of reaction to monitored stations, etc. Something that we could put in place inside of 5 years and absolutely control the border. That'd be the first thing that we have to do before I think that we should discuss a more comprehensive immigration solution, and certainly before we would have any meaningful assimilation take place. One of the ways that Americans have traditionally, at least on 2 or 3 occasions, provided a political solution to mass immigration which became problematic. In other words, providing social difficulties, economic difficulties, a lack of assimilation. The way it's been done in the past is through what they call National Origins Act. And this is simply, to some extent, arbitrary, but taking a census. You could pick any one of them. You normally pick one 10, 20 years prior to your current point in time, so we wouldn't tend to choose 2010. We might choose 2000, we might choose 1980, but essentially get a fix on percentages of national origin inside the country. And then cause your legal immigration to mirror those percentages. If it's 1 million, fine, but those percentages should roughly parallel those that are already in the country. Now that would essentially enable assimilation to be more rapid, rather than enabling one source of immigration to continue to overwhelm every other source. So that's one method that is fairly objective, and depending on the census you use and how you implement it, could be done in a way that's fair.
But isn't it always like the circumstances on the ground in that country, like?
Well, immigration is brought about by push and pull, and so there are situations obviously abroad. If it's war or famine or economic collapse, that will push people out. And then there are conditions inside the country that act as a magnet, and these are pull factors. And one of the things we have to do is reduce the pull factors, particularly these incentives to come in and essentially get tax-supported education, tax-supported medical care, tax-supported jobs.
But that would mean you would have to ask someone for their ID.
Well, true, and also not completely, because if we actually controlled our borders or points of disbarkation, then that's not altogether the case. If we actually controlled our borders, then you'd have your set of people that are here, and then you introduce people that you allowed in. But you're right. Just like we should require photo ID for voting, and we do now in the state of Texas, we would need ID, I suppose, for participation in most things in society. But you wouldn't really have to go after those who are here if you dry up the source of immigration. And you could do that by controlling your borders. And that's something that many countries of the world have figured out how to do, and we just have lacked the political will to do. And here's the thing. I remember when Ronald Reagan was president, and in 1986, the last big amnesty. But remember, when Ronald Reagan attempted a comprehensive immigration solution, he allowed the amnesty of nearly 3 million people. And that was predicated on a couple of things. That was predicated at the time on securing our border, which did not happen. And it was also predicated on some economic development and reform within the nation of Mexico, which did not happen. And so that's why I'm absolutely opposed to any kind of amnesty whatsoever until, A, the border is secured, or at least the plan for security is in place and definite. And secondarily, I think that we've got to do things on our side as opposed to hoping or thinking that Mexico will do things on theirs. And we've got to hold the cards in terms of who gets in and who doesn't. The whole idea between NAFTA, other than this free market zone that was supposed to be efficient for all concerned, was to foster economic growth in Mexico so that they would not have the incentive or the disparity between Mexico and the U.S. to keep coming here. It didn't work. The government of Mexico is no less corrupt, the crime is no less rife, and the economic situation there, owing to nationalized industries in Mexico, is no better.